Welcome back. My name is Chris, and in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the various options you have available to you for your NetSuite implementation. And I'm assuming that while you've decided that NetSuite is the ERP that you want to go with, you haven't yet actually started the implementation process, or potentially you have started and you're having second thoughts on whether you made the best decision. So first off, let's lay out what are the 5 different options, or you could say routes you have available to you. I'm going to be going into more detail on each one of them, but the 5 are NetSuite itself as a company, and I'm going to be referring to it as NetSuite Professional Services as opposed to NetSuite the product. Then you have alliance partners, then you have solution providers, independent consultants, and then you could say going solo or just doing the implementation yourself. So those are the 5 different options you have available for doing your NetSuite implementation. And we're going to be breaking them down one by one. What are their pros and their cons? And also we're going to be touching on the aspect of who are you buying NetSuite, the software, the product from, because it's not necessarily that you're just going to be purchasing it from NetSuite itself, Oracle NetSuite as a company. And before we actually dive into the various options you have available, there's really a few different things you should be thinking with when you're going through this process. Regardless of who you end up going with, there's some certain parameters you should always have front of mind. The first one, and by far the most important, is what is your industry, and making sure you choose an implementer that has a lot of experience and knowledge of your industry. So if you're in manufacturing or maybe you're in mining, you want to choose an implementer who has experience with that type of industry and have done implementations in that industry. No matter who you're talking to, you should ask for other examples of clients that they've implemented successfully NetSuite with, and actually get a list of names, and you can contact those other clients and try to ask just some basic questions on how the implementation went, how long did it take, what was their experience overall, things that they didn't like about it, things that they did like about it, and really just get an understanding and a confidence on your standpoint that this company that you go with really does have that expertise in your industry and will be able to get you to the finish line for your implementation. The next big thing to think with is the demo. So in other words, the company is going to be demoing to you that they can do your NetSuite implementation. And this really ties into that first point of industry expertise, because when you receive a demo, it should be in NetSuite itself, and it should prove to you that this company has an expertise and prowess, not just with NetSuite, but also with NetSuite in relation to your industry and your company, really specifically your needs. So if they're just showing you a PowerPoint presentation that says, well, you're in manufacturing, so here's a bunch of bullet points on why we're great for doing manufacturing implementations, that's something that should be a red flag for you. You should be walked through in NetSuite showing you and it really gives you that comfort that they understand your company well enough in that industry to show you really what it's going to look like for you in NetSuite. So they should be able to walk you through some of your common practices, some of your common procedures and things that you're going to be doing in NetSuite, as well as potentially pointing out some of the pain points that you might be running into or that you could run into with NetSuite, as well as how they would resolve that. A really good demo is just one of the best indications of the fact that your implementation is going to go smoothly, is that they can show you they really understand you, they understand your industry, and they understand NetSuite well enough to bring all those things together. So a few other tips when you're shopping around for an implementer: you should be able to meet your implementation team as early on in the sales process as possible. You don't want to just go through the process of purchasing NetSuite and signing on with an implementation without ever having met the actual consultants who will be doing your implementation. So it's important that you meet those people early on as possible, that you're comfortable with them, and that you're confident that it's going to be a good match between you, your company, and these, whether it's one consultant or maybe a team of consultants and developers, really meeting those people early on and feeling like it's a good matchup for the implementation process. It's important to get a company that is established. And what I mean by that is not necessarily a big company or one that's just been around for a long time, but specifically that has consultants and technical consultants that have longevity with the company. And the reason that's important is because after talking and really dealing with a lot of different clients who have had team members, maybe their primary consultant, get swapped out, maybe because they went to a different company or they got fired or they quit, when you lose that consultant that you're dealing with, sometimes it can feel like you're starting from scratch because they know everything about your company, they know everything about your implementation, and you might be months into the implementation process, and to lose that key member of this project can really set you back. So it's important to deal with a company that retains and really treats their consultants well, so that you're dealing with guys that have been for a long time and you're confident that you're gonna have that same team member or team members throughout the entirety of your implementation process. The worst thing you can run into, and I've seen this with clients, where in the course of an implementation, they might have had to cycle through 3 or even 4 primary consultants on their project. So that can be a little trickier to ascertain. In the process of asking other clients that have been with that implementer, you can ask them, listen, in the course of your implementation, did you have any swap out, or did you have any consultants that left the project and new people that came on? That's a great way to find out whether it's been done with other clients. You can also ask in the consultants and the sales representatives that you're dealing with, simply ask them how long they've been with the company. If you're hearing from a lot of different people with that company that they've been around for a few months or even just 6 months, that could be a red flag. If you're asking their team members and you're hearing 3 years, 6 years, maybe even 10 years from a number of different people on their team, that's a really good indication to you that the likelihood that you'll get through an entire implementation with the same core team is much higher. And then lastly, and this is not going to be applicable in every case, but you should keep in mind in many instances what the area or the location of the company is in relation to your company. Ideally, you're in the same time zone. Certainly, if they're on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast, that 3-hour time difference can be a problem in terms of cutting down the available time that you guys have to have meetings, work together, and be able to just ask questions and get a quick response from them. And certainly, if they're in Europe, let's say, and you're in the United States, that can be a major problem in terms of the time difference. Also, kind of in that same vein, even if you're just doing an implementation, let's say in the United States, but you know your company is going to grow, or you know you have other subsidiaries, let's say in Australia or in Europe, that at a certain point later down the road, you're going to want to implement NetSuite for those subsidiaries, you might want to know that the company you're going with is an international company and has offices in those locations. So for the sake of go lives and really just support, you have those team members in the correct locations to provide the best service for you as possible. So those are some basic tips to think with whenever you're shopping around for an implementer. And before going actually into the various options you have available, I do want to make a point. If you're finding this video helpful, please hit that like button. We also make videos at least once a week. So if you hit subscribe, you're going to have those available to you. And lastly, if you have videos you'd like me to make, please let me know down in the comments below, or even just to provide feedback. I love hearing from you guys. So please leave me a comment, and otherwise, let's get into this. First off, we have NetSuite Professional Services. And for a lot of people, that seems like the obvious option to go with because you're purchasing NetSuite as a product. Why not get the company that makes the product to do your implementation? Clearly, they would understand it best and have the best likelihood of doing an implementation. But the answer is not necessarily. And you might have heard of the term Suite Success before. Suite Success is basically NetSuite's methodology for doing implementations. And the way they organize that is they basically make these bundles or these packages of NetSuite that match a certain industry. So again, if you're in mining or you're in manufacturing or food and beverage, they're going to have these packages for manufacturing, for food and beverage. And those packages are meant to just be given to the client and just used straight out of the box. The customizations for this are very, very limited, almost no automations, no integrations. The concept is that you're just gonna take that bundle as it is and roll with it. So that's why sometimes you'll hear about these implementation timelines of maybe 3 months or 6 months. The way they can do such a short implementation timeline is by basically doing very limited customization. So they're crunching down that time. They're just giving it to you. They're going to set up those basic things, no further customizations, and then you'll just roll with NetSuite as it is. And if that is what you're looking for and you really don't have a lot of needs, you just need NetSuite for a couple specific things, then that might be the best option for you. There's also the assumption that if you're doing a faster implementation, that it will also be a cheaper implementation. Now, that's not always the case, but that is certainly an assumption. And if you can have a very quick implementation, it might be more inexpensive expensive compared to some of your other options. So what are some of the downsides with going with NetSuite Professional Services for your implementation? The most obvious one is the fact that they don't do these heavy customizations. If you need automations, workflows, maybe some suite scripts or an integration setup, it's not just that NetSuite is not strong at those things. They're going to tell you up front that it's simply not what they do. You're going to have to go with another provider, and we'll get into that in a second in terms of how that fits in. Another thing to think with is the fact that NetSuite gets their consultants. Oftentimes, their hiring procedure is to get recent college graduates or young professionals that they then train on how to be consultants. And the problem with that is that you're probably going to deal with some less experienced consultants. Also, because their implementations tend to be what you could call more shallow, you're not going to be dealing with consultants that have that depth and real understanding of NetSuite and how it works. So that's just something to think with. As you go to some of the other providers, you're going to find the consultants tend to be more experienced, more veteran, and have a lot more tools in their tool belt for doing an implementation. The last point I'm going to bring up is in relation to the support that NetSuite provides. So if you think about the entire implementation process as the sales cycle at the beginning, where you're purchasing NetSuite, right? Because it's not just one thing, but it might have various modules based on your needs. You then have the implementation, and then lastly, you have the support or the follow-up after you've gone live and you're maybe optimizing your NetSuite, or you want to handle any kind of problems that you run into with your NetSuite. So that comes at the end. So NetSuite, they have a number of different things they can provide for support. And as we go on later, we'll kind of get into some other options you have for support. But NetSuite, while it's not necessarily never going to fit your needs, but most of the clients that I've talked to and the feedback that I've heard from the NetSuite support is that it generally either just barely matches the requirements or it falls short of that. I've certainly never heard of someone who's been a rave feedback regarding the NetSuite support that's provided. So that's just something to think with. If you're purchasing NetSuite from NetSuite itself, and then you're getting that support package, it doesn't tend to be the most highly reviewed. So that's NetSuite Professional Services as an option. So the second option we have is, if you think about NetSuite at the top, NetSuite has two different partner types. So one is alliance partners, and the second is called solution providers. So first we're going to talk about alliance partners. And alliance partners, basically what makes them different is the fact that they're not going to sell NetSuite to you. The NetSuite product is going to be sold to you by NetSuite Professional Services, and then the alliance partner is going to come along and actually do your implementation. So some examples of larger alliance partners would be, for example, there's Bryant Park Consulting. There's also Myers Holem is a big one. There's also Accenture. So these guys have done a ton of different implementations, and they really fit into that middle of doing the implementation itself, not selling the product, and also in most cases not providing support, because the support is generally provided by NetSuite. So what are some of the positives of going with an alliance partner? If we're going to compare it to going with NetSuite Professional Services, the obvious pro is the fact that the alliance partners can provide more customization. And again, any kind of needs that you have, maybe you need to hook up a web store and have an integration for that. The alliance partner is going to be able to provide that because NetSuite Professional Services can't. So NetSuite's actually going to dish you off. They're going to pass you on to the alliance partner to do a more complex integration. NetSuite's not even going to try. They're going to say, listen, go with this alliance partner. That's one of the benefits of going with an alliance partner. You could also consider it a positive on the fact that because they're not selling NetSuite itself, they're not going around looking for clients, they're getting their clients flowed to them by NetSuite Professional Services. They don't have a focus on sales. So they're not focused on that sales aspect of things. They're really just kind of buckling down and doubling down on the implementation process itself. Now, the downside of going with an alliance partner is because, again, if you think about that whole process, the sales cycle, the implementation, and the support, if you just find someone who's really just focused on the implementation, the downside of that is that, and I'm not going to say in every case, but there's a tendency overall to be a little bit less responsible or really accountable for the entire process, because you as a client, you're not just doing an implementation. That's not the only thing you care about. You want to make sure the product you're sold is appropriate for you, the implementation goes well, and that the support that carries you on into perpetuity is appropriate and it is the best support that you could have offered to you. So by just having someone who's only going to do that implementation and is not responsible for what you were sold, whether maybe it was something, maybe you got sold too much, or maybe there's modules that you're missing, but that's not their problem. They're just going to do the implementation. And they also don't Again, I'm not saying in every case, but they don't necessarily have to ensure that the implementation is amazing, because once they're done with it and you go live, your problems or any issues you run into with NetSuite, that's passed off back to NetSuite for their support. So the company just kind of does the implementation and then you're off to someone else. You're a little bit more like you're on a conveyor belt and you're just another client. Again, I'm not going to say that's true of all alliance partners or of all implementations. It's certainly a generality, but you can just think with that as a general rule of thumb, is that you're going to be nestled into that one aspect of things with that company, as opposed to a more holistic view of the entire implementation and support process. Now, the third option is going with what's called a solution provider. So what is the difference between a solution provider and an alliance partner? The solution providers can sell you and will try to sell you NetSuite itself. The reason that's important is because you have to understand you're not just having the option to buy NetSuite from the company itself. You can buy it from these solution providers. And one of the best, you could say, positives or pros of going with a solution provider is that they generally tend to have a lot more ability to do in-depth customizations. And because there's a bunch of solution providers, you can go with one that has a lot of expertise or industry-specific knowledge. Just to give you some examples of some common or larger solution providers, there's some big ones like Eide Bailly and RSM. They've been around for a long time. They've done a lot of implementations, but you also have some of these more mid-sized solution providers that really tend to have a focus and tend to be great in certain areas. So for example, SES Cloud has a lot of focus on things like manufacturing and food and beverage. And while they can do other things, they tend to be really great at that. And then there's other solution providers that, for example, Crafted specifically tends to do breweries. So they're great in that niche. And there's a lot of solution providers that really have that vertical or that specific thing that they focus on. And kind of taking you back to that first tip I gave you, you want to find a company that has that experience with your needs as a client. So that can be one of the best positives that you're going to get out of a solution provider. Another thing to think with is the fact that the solution provider program has been around, I think, since the early 2000s. So it's been around for a long time. Some of these consultants and some of these agencies have a lot of experience in doing implementations, as opposed to the alliance partner program, which has really been around, I think, for 6 or 7 years. So it's not that they don't have experience, but the solution provider program has been around for longer. So just a bit more longevity with those guys. So then the question is, what are some of the downsides of going with a solution provider? Well, because they tend to have more seasoned and experienced consultants who know how to do these more complex integrations and customizations, they tend to have a slightly higher average rate, the rate that you're going to be paying the consultants per hour for the implementation. Generally, again, not in all cases, but tends to be a little bit higher. So that's something to think with. And you really need to weigh that against the overall cost of having a successful implementation, whether that extra cost per hour is worth it to really make sure that you're pulling off a successful implementation. Another thing to think with, and this isn't necessarily a downside, but just something to think with, when people find out that they can buy not just from NetSuite, but from a solution provider, when we're talking about the software, an obvious first question is, well, am I going to get a better discount from just going with NetSuite? The answer, to make it very simple, is no. They both can provide a lot of different discounts. So the advice I can give you is, no matter who you buy from, make sure you get the best discount possible. So really don't just take the first number that you're given, dig in there, ask, if you're getting a bunch of modules, is there a way that you can get a package discount or any kind of discount that can possibly come your way? There's a lot of different options that are provided both to the solution providers as well as to the NetSuite sales representatives to provide discounts to clients. So make sure you're getting the most for your money, and you're really demanding that you get the most discount you possibly can. So the next two implementation options that you have available to you, they're less commonly used, but I do want to make a mention of them. The fourth one is an independent consultant. And what I'm talking about here specifically, I'm referring to like a smaller, maybe just one-man band or a small group. It might be a CEO for a consultant agency who's the principal consultant, and he has a small team of a developer and maybe a junior consultant. So dealing with one of these small teams of these independent consultants, one of the benefits of that is, because they're so small, you might be just one of a handful of clients that they have. So your ability to have that intimate relationship with them and really get a lot out of their attention and their time focused on you is much greater than dealing with one of these larger companies. So that is a benefit. But there are some downsides that come with that. So the more major downside that's kind of obvious is by dealing with one of these smaller guys, it's a bit more hit and miss, and there's a lot more risk associated with it. Because let's say they only have 2 clients. If they take on now a 3rd client, maybe where you were getting a lot of their attention before, maybe they're now completely overwhelmed and you're getting almost no attention. Or potentially you run into a certain point in your implementation where you need a certain type of suite script that their developer doesn't know how to do. Now you have to find a different developer just to get that thing done. So by having those limited resources, you are dealing with a bit more risk factor in dealing with such a small consultant. Also, there's the fact that that consultant will not be able to sell you NetSuite. If it's not a solution provider, that they're not going to be able to sell you NetSuite. So you're going to have to purchase NetSuite from NetSuite itself and then go to this independent consultant. And the 5th option is what I'm calling solo, or just doing the implementation yourself. And there's really no instance where I would recommend doing that. With the complexity of NetSuite and the difficulty that you might run into in doing an implementation, in every single case I can think of, you're going to want to go with a company who specializes in that. Even if you've got some guys on your team that maybe know NetSuite or were even NetSuite consultants before, to just rely on a couple resources on your own team is going to be very risky. And the odds that you're going to need to turn to somebody else at some point in the implementation to make sure that it's successful is very high. So I don't recommend trying to save on those implementation costs and jeopardizing your entire implementation. So those are the 5 options you have available to you. To recap, we have going with NetSuite professional services, going with the alliance partners, going with solution providers, going with an independent consultant, or going with a solo or doing your own implementation. And I said early on that I would give a recommendation in terms of what you should do. And you've probably figured out at this point that it really depends on what your needs are and what you would like from an implementer. Just as a rule of thumb, if you have a very small, you need very limited things from NetSuite, you don't have a lot of customizations or no customizations at all, and you just want a short, fast, simple implementation process and suite success fits those needs, then you might want to go with NetSuite professional services for your implementation. However, in most cases, companies are going to need something that's a bit more in depth. They're going to need something that's custom for their needs based on their industry. So in most cases, it's a great idea to check out the solution providers and shop around for one that really is in your niche, has industry expertise for you, and is a good fit for you. And you like the team, you've met them, they've done a great demo, and they just fit all those check boxes. So that's my best recommendation. At least shop around in there. It's not to say that if you've already purchased NetSuite and you've maybe started a relationship with an alliance partner and you like them, it's not necessarily that that's a bad idea. If you find it's a good fit and you feel confident that that implementation is going to go well with that team, by all means, follow through on it. But if you're starting from scratch, that's my recommendation. Shop around, see if you can find a consultant agency that best fits your needs and can tailor it to you and prove to you that they know your industry and your company best. And those are my recommendations. So if you found this video helpful at all, please hit the like button, subscribe for future videos, and I'll see you in the next video.